Clay Hollister never locked his barn. Not because he trusted folks so much, but because the land was wide and trouble was usually far off, until it wasn't. That morning, frost still clung to the low grasses and a cold wind blew across the fields. Clay was halfway through feeding the horses when he heard it, something between a groan and a sob. He stopped cold, pitchfork in hand, and turned toward the sound. There, lying in the corner behind a stack of hay bales, was a girl. At first, he thought she was dead. She looked young, maybe 20 at most, and dirt clung to her dress like she'd crawled through half the territory to get there. Her belly was round and high. She was in labor. Clay dropped the pitchfork and rushed over. "Ma'am," he said, kneeling beside her. Her eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain. She didn't answer, just gave a broken cry as her body tensed again. He'd helped birth calves, sure, but this was different. Her breathing was fast and shallow. Sweat poured from her face despite the cold. Clay wrapped his coat around her shoulders and looked around the barn, desperate for something, anything that could help. There was no time to go for the doctor in town. No time for anything. She screamed again, curling into herself. Clay sat back on his heels, his heart pounding. She wasn't going to make it through this alone. And now she had him. An hour passed. Then two. She labored hard, her cries echoing through the wood beams, growing weaker each time. Clay fetched water, boiled cloth, did what he could. When the baby finally came, it wasn't crying. Clay held the tiny, slick body in his hands, frozen. He turned the baby over, patted its back. Nothing. Then a gasp, a whimper, and then a full, furious wail. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He wrapped the baby in his shirt and handed it to the girl, who looked at him with eyes full of pain and something else, fear. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked down at the baby and didn't answer. "Where's your people?" he tried again. Still nothing. The silence stretched between them like wire. Clay didn't push. Instead, he set about cleaning the space, boiling more water, making her a bed from hay and saddle blankets. He stayed nearby, but didn't touch her unless she needed help. Her hands trembled when she drank water. Her lips were cracked, her skin pale. Later that night, when the baby finally slept and her body stilled, she spoke. "I'm May." Her voice was quiet, rough. "May," Clay repeated. "You safe here?" She nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe him. In the days that followed, Clay let her rest. He brought her food, checked the baby, and tried to keep things quiet around the ranch. But word got out faster than he liked. The sheriff stopped by on the third morning, dust thick on his boots and a heavy look in his eye. "Morning, Clay," Sheriff Dobson said, tipping his hat. "You got someone here?" Clay didn't answer right away. The sheriff's horse snorted and pawed the dirt. "Someone saw a girl come around your place," the sheriff added. "Said she looked half dead." "She's resting," Clay said flatly. Dobson's eyes narrowed. "She got a name?" Clay's jaw tightened. "Don't know yet." The sheriff shifted in the saddle. "You know I gotta ask questions. Word in town is a girl matching that description went missing 2 weeks ago from the rail yard. Said she was running from something. Might have been with child. Might have been mixed up with someone dangerous." Clay stood firm. "She's got a baby. Ain't in no shape to answer questions right now." The sheriff studied him for a long second. "Well, when she is, I need to talk to her. If she's who I think, there's trouble coming." Clay gave a slow nod, watching the sheriff ride off. Back in the barn, May sat up, holding her baby close. She'd heard everything. "You gonna send me away?" she asked, her voice hollow. Clay shook his head. "No, I didn't steal nothing. Didn't hurt nobody. Just had to get away." He believed her, but belief didn't count for much when the law came calling. She lowered her head. "They'll take her. They'll take my baby. Not if I don't let 'em," Clay said, more to himself than to her. She looked up at him then, something sharp in her expression. Hope, maybe, or disbelief. "You don't know me," she whispered. "Why would you help?" He didn't have a good answer. Only that when he'd found her there, crumpled and cold, something in him wouldn't let him walk away. That night, while she slept, he paced the barn. Thoughts clattered in his head. If the law came with proof, if they said she'd done something, he couldn't stop them. But there was one thing he could do. By morning, he'd shaved, put on his best shirt, and hitched his wagon. May watched from the barn doorway. Her baby pressed her chest. "Where you going?" He looked up at her. "Into town. To fix this." Her eyes searched his face. "What do you mean?" He swallowed. "Gonna marry you." She blinked. "What?" He walked toward her, slow and careful. "They can't take a man's wife. Not without cause. They can't take a man's child, neither." She stared at him, stunned. "I know it's sudden," he said, "and maybe it don't make much sense. But it's the only way I see to keep you safe." Her lip trembled. "You don't have to do this." "I know." Silence hung between them. Then, slowly, she nodded. Clay drove them to the little church at the edge of town, quiet and cold. May wore a borrowed shawl. The baby was swaddled in flannel. The preacher didn't ask many questions. He'd seen enough hard stories in his time. Afterward, with the paper signed and the ring slipped onto her hand, Clay turned to May and saw tears in her eyes. Not joy, something else. Relief, maybe, or dread. Back at the barn, she sat on the edge of the makeshift bed and whispered, "You saved my life." Clay took off his coat and hung it by the door. "Maybe you saved mine, too." But neither of them smiled, because they both knew this wasn't the end of the trouble. It was only the beginning. Clay didn't sleep much after the wedding. He kept waking up to every little noise, the creak of the windmill, the rattle of the barn door. He'd lived on the land alone for 5 years since his father died and left him the ranch, but now everything felt different. There was someone else under his roof. Two, really. May and the baby were quiet most of the time, but the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that carried weight. May moved slow for days after the birth. Her body was still healing, and her mind, well, Clay could tell something inside her hadn't settled. She'd stare off sometimes, like she wasn't in the room at all. When he asked if she was all right, she'd just nod and look away. He didn't push. He remembered the way his mother had been after she lost Clay's youngest sister. Some kinds of pain didn't have words. The baby, named Ruthie, May finally said, was small but strong. Clay had never held a child before her. The first time May handed Ruthie to him, his hands felt too big, too rough. But Ruthie settled into his arms like she didn't mind. That moment did something to Clay. It wasn't love yet. He wasn't sure what love even meant anymore, but it was something close. A few days later, May was strong enough to sit outside under the cottonwoods while Clay worked the paddock. He built a pen for a new calf and kept checking over his shoulder, making sure she was still there. She never tried to run. Maybe she couldn't, or maybe she just didn't want it anymore. Late one afternoon, just as the sun began to sink, a horse came riding hard up the dirt road. Clay's stomach sank before he could even make out the face. It was Jess Talbot, his neighbor 2 miles east. Jess was a drinker, a liar, and mean when he didn't get his way. He dismounted with a grunt and eyed May sitting on the porch, then turned to Clay. "Heard you got yourself a wife." Clay kept his tone flat. "That's right." Jess sniffed. "Funny. Didn't know you were looking. Girl just drop into your lap, huh?" Clay stepped off the porch and met him halfway. "What do you want, Jess?" Jess looked past him again. "She the one the sheriff's a skin about? Heard a girl ran from Denver. Word is she stabbed some man in the yard behind the saloon." May had gone still. Her hands gripped the baby so tight, Clay saw her knuckles whiten. "She's my wife," Clay said. "That's all you need to know." Just give a half smile. "You think a ring's gonna protect her?" "Law don't care who's wearing what. If she's who I think she is, there'll be men coming. Maybe not just the sheriff. Maybe worse." Clay didn't say a word, and Jess finally mounted back up. "Just trying to be friendly," he said with mock sweetness before riding off. That night, May didn't eat. She sat by the stove, holding Ruthie, staring into the flames. "You gonna ask me?" she said suddenly. Clay looked up from the stew. He hadn't touched much either. "Ask you what?" "About what Jess said." He shook his head. "Don't need to." "I didn't kill nobody," she said. "But I did stab him. I had to." Clay stayed quiet, waiting. He was a foreman at the laundry house. "Mr. Bannister, I was working off a debt. Not mine, my brother's. They said if I did the night work, they'd clear it. But it got worse. He started coming in after the doors were locked. Started grabbing, saying things, threatening me if I told. I tried to hold out, but one night he cornered me. I had a shears on my apron. I didn't plan it. I just wanted him to stop. Her voice cracked. He didn't die. I heard he's still walking. But after that, I ran. Clay rubbed a hand over his face. He didn't doubt her. He didn't have to. He could see the truth in the way she trembled. "You're not in the wrong," he said. She looked up sharply. "The law won't see it that way." "I ain't the law." She studied him a long time, then finally nodded. In the following days, Clay tried to act like life was normal. He still fed the stock, still rode the fence line, still hammered posts in the pasture. But now, every hoofbeat on the road made his heart lurch. He kept his rifle closer. He started locking the doors at night, something he never used to bother with. May stay near the house, helping where she could, though her strength wasn't all the way back. She didn't talk much, but she watched everything. Clay started noticing how quick she was to read a face, how she could tell when a horse was about to spook before it even shifted its feet. She'd learned how to stay alert, probably the hard way. Then, one morning, a new stranger arrived. He was young, maybe 25, wearing a fancy gray coat and clean boots that didn't belong out here. He came on a fine bay horse and carried a notebook in his coat pocket. He introduced himself as Calvin Pierce, investigator out of Denver. "I'm looking into an incident that occurred at the Rail Yard Laundry House about a month back," he said, eyes flicking over Clay's porch, where May had just stepped out. "She's not talking to anyone," Clay said, stepping forward. Calvin looked him over. "I understand you married her." Clay nodded. "You understand, marriage doesn't wipe the slate clean when it comes to an open investigation." Clay's jaw tensed. "You got a warrant?" "Not yet." "Then you can leave." The man didn't argue, just smiled politely. "I'll be around." He turned his horse and rode off. May was trembling again by the time Clay came back inside. "He'll bring more men next time," she said. "They'll find a way." Clay looked at her, really looked, and made a choice he hadn't let himself face yet. "Then we leave." Her eyes widened. "Leave? This ranch isn't worth your life." "Or Ruthie's." Tears filled her eyes. "It's not fair. I didn't do nothing wrong." Clay stepped closer and touched her shoulder. "I know, but that don't matter to the kind of people who want someone to blame." They stood there in silence, both of them realizing the life they'd started building was already slipping through their fingers. Outside, the wind picked up and dust curled across the porch. The storm wasn't just coming. It was already here. The plan to leave weighed heavy on Clay, but once he'd said the words, there was no taking them back. They didn't ask where they'd go, and he didn't offer. Some things didn't need to be explained right away. That night, while Ruthie slept between them on a nest of blankets, Clay sat up watching the moonlight shift on the floorboards. May's breathing was shallow but steady. He kept his hand near hers, not touching, just close. It wasn't about romance. It was about anchoring each other to something solid, something real, while everything around them threatened to break loose. By morning, they had a plan. Clay would ride to Mason's Crossing, 2 towns west, and ask around about work. It was far enough from Denver that the trouble might not follow. He had a distant cousin there, Henry, who ran a freight line. Maybe they'd need an extra set of hands. May would stay behind with Ruthie until Clay could send word. It wasn't ideal, but traveling with a newborn across miles of empty land was dangerous. Before he left, Clay took May's hand and said, "If I'm not back in 5 days, go north. Follow the river. You'll find folks who'll help." She nodded, though the look in her eyes made his chest ache. He wanted to kiss her, but didn't. Instead, he touched Ruthie's tiny hand, then rode out under a rising sun. The trip to Mason's Crossing was long and rough. Clay rode hard, stopping only when his horse needed water or rest. The closer he got to town, the more he second-guessed himself. Was he dragging May into more danger? Was this just running from the law, or toward something worse? But Mason's Crossing turned out quieter than expected. The town sat nestled between 2 low hills, with only a single saloon, a blacksmith, and a dusty boarding house. He found Henry by the river, unloading crates from barge. "Clay Hollister?" Henry said, squinting. "Well, I'll be damned. You look like your old man." Clay didn't waste time on small talk. He explained what he needed, skimming past the part about May's past. Henry listened, scratching at the gray in his beard. "Can't promise much," he said finally, "but I could use someone to run supplies out to the mines. You'd have to live rough for a while." Clay nodded. "That's fine. I just need a place for my family." Henry raised a brow. "Family, huh?" Clay met his gaze. "Wife and child." Henry shrugged. "All right. You send for him soon as you're settled." Clay spent 2 nights in Mason's Crossing before heading back. The ride home felt longer, mostly because he couldn't shake the thought of May waiting in the barn with Ruthie, listening for trouble every time the wind blew. He got back after dusk, the sky streaked with deep orange. The sight of May at the door, Ruthie cradled in her arms, made something tight in his chest loosen. "I got the job," he said, smiling for the first time in days. She smiled back, soft and unsure, but real. That night, they sat near the fire inside the house. Clay had finally brought them in from the barn once he felt it was safe enough. May sat with her feet tucked under her, Ruthie dozing in her arms. Clay passed her a mug of tea and said, "There's a small house near the freight station." Henry said we could have it. "Not much, but it's warm." May stared into the flames. "I ain't lived in a house that was mine since I was a girl." Clay didn't know what to say. He reached across the space between them and rested his hand on her knee. She didn't flinch. "I don't know how to be a wife," she said after a moment. "You're already a mother," he replied. "That's more than most men deserve." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. The next day they packed what little they had, mostly clothes, blankets, and some dry goods. Clay fixed up the wagon, added extra bedding, and tucked Ruthie in a basket padded with cotton and straw. They left at sunrise, moving slow to protect the baby from the cold. May kept Ruthie wrapped tight against her chest while Clay drove. The wind bit hard, but the road was empty. At night, they made camp near the river. Clay started a fire while May warmed milk over the flames. Ruthie slept between them in the wagon, bundled so tightly she barely stirred. Later, May lay on her side, facing Clay in the flickering light. "You're kind to me," she whispered. Clay looked at her, unsure what to say. "You didn't have to be," she added. "You don't know me." "Not really. I know enough," he said. "Sometimes I think this whole thing ain't real. Like I'll wake up, and I'm still in that laundry room with blood on my hands and no way out." "You're not," he said softly. "You're here, with me. That's real." She moved a little closer, her breath warming the space between them. For the first time since she arrived in his barn, her fingers found his. He held on. Over the next few days, they grew used to the rhythm of the road. Ruthie started smiling more, tiny, fleeting smiles that came and went like the sun behind clouds. May sang to her when she fussed. Clay caught himself watching May more often, her face when she laughed, the way she tucked her hair back, the quiet strength in her hands. One morning, while they stopped at a creek, Clay handed Ruthie a smooth stone to hold. She grabbed it clumsily and squealed. May laughed, really laughed, and the sound caught Clay off guard. It was the first time she sounded like someone free. "Look at her," May said, her voice full of wonder. "She don't know anything about what we've been through. She just sees light and color in our faces. She sees her mother," Clay said, "and she's safe now." May looked at him, eyes wide, then nodded. "I think maybe I'm starting to believe that." When they reached Mason's Crossing, Henry greeted them with a nod and a spare key. The little house sat behind the freight station, with 2 rooms, a stove, and a narrow porch. It wasn't much, but to May, it felt like a palace. They cleaned it together, laughing as they scrubbed years of dust off the walls. Clay fixed a broken window, May boiled water to wash the sheets. Ruthie slept in a drawer lined with quilts until Clay carved a cradle for her out of pine. For the first time in weeks, they weren't looking over their shoulders. Clay took the job running freight. Long days, rough roads, hauling supplies up to the mines and back. He came home dirty and sore, but always to May and Ruthie. And every night, he found the same thing waiting: a warm fire, a woman who trusted him more each day, and a child who lit up when she heard his boots on the floor. One evening, Clay returned to find May standing at the stove, humming. Ruthie sat in her cradle, gumming a wooden spoon. May turned, saw him, and smiled. "I made stew," she said. "Hope you're hungry." He set his bag down and pulled her into a hug. Her head rested against his chest, and for a moment, the whole world shrank to that small room, that small life. It was enough. They sat down to eat, and May reached across the table, lacing her fingers through his. "You saved me," she said, barely above a whisper. Clay looked at her. "You saved yourself. I just gave you the space to do it." But her eyes said she didn't believe that. To her, he'd been the only open door in a life full of locked ones. As spring came, the snow melted from the hills, and wildflowers began to bloom along the creek. Life wasn't perfect. They still didn't talk much about the past. They still didn't know if the law would come calling again. But there was laughter now, real, steady laughter, and quiet moments where Clay would catch May staring out the window, a peaceful look on her face. One morning, while Clay was chopping wood, May came outside holding Ruthie. She watched him swing the axe, sweat shining on his back. "You ever think you'd have this?" she asked. He paused, wiping his brow. Never even dared to. She stepped closer, balancing Ruthie on her hip. "Me neither." He dropped the axe and came to her. Ruthie squealed between them as he leaned down and kissed May. Soft, slow, like there was no rush. For the first time, it didn't feel like pretending. It felt like the truth. Inside, the stew bubbled on the stove. The cradle rocked gently, and outside, under the cottonwoods, the future began to feel possible. The spring rains came hard and sudden. Roads turned to rivers, and the river near Mason's Crossing threatened to spill over its banks. Clay kept working the freight line, though it got harder to bring the wagon through mud that reached up to the axles. Every time he left, May stood at the window with Ruthie in her arms, watching until he disappeared into the trees. He never said it out loud, but it was clear in the way his eyes lingered at the door. He worried he might not make it back. It wasn't just the weather, though. Something had changed. Clay felt it before he understood it. May pulling away bit by bit. She still smiled, still held his hand, still laughed sometimes. But her eyes had that distant look again, like she was bracing for a storm inside herself. He didn't know what to do with that. He thought maybe love, real love, was growing between them. But now he wasn't so sure. One night, he came home to find the house dark. No fire, no stew, no baby sounds. His heart jumped into his throat as he stepped inside and called her name. "May." She sat on the floor in the back room, rocking back and forth with Ruthie tight in her arms. Her dress was soaked through with sweat, though the room was cold. "She had a fever," she whispered. Clay rushed over and knelt beside them. Ruthie's skin was burning. She whimpered but didn't cry. "I didn't know what to do," May said, voice trembling. "I tried cool cloths. I held her all day. I prayed. I thought she was dying." "She's not," Clay said, trying to believe it. "She's strong." But he could see the terror in May's face. She wasn't just afraid of losing Ruthie. She was afraid she wouldn't survive it. "I can't lose her," she whispered, her whole body shaking. "She's the only thing I've ever done right. The only good thing I've got." "You've got me," Clay said softly. But she didn't answer. She just kept rocking, her face pressed against Ruthie's hot forehead. They sat like that until dawn, Clay on the floor beside them, feeding the fire to keep the room warm while also dampening a cloth for Ruthie's brow. When the fever finally broke and Ruthie's breathing steadied, May fell asleep where she sat, holding the baby like she would never let go again. In the days that followed, May barely spoke. She went through the motions, cooking, washing, folding clothes, but her eyes were somewhere else. Clay tried to talk to her, to remind her that Ruthie was safe, but it was like something had snapped. And then, one morning, He found her out behind the house, sitting in the grass and staring at nothing. "I shouldn't have married you," she said before he could speak. Clay froze. "I did it because I was scared. I didn't even know you. I just needed a way out." He swallowed hard. "Do you regret it?" May looked down. "Sometimes I think you're too good. And I know I'm not. That man back in Denver, I still see his face. I still hear the things he said to me. I keep thinking one day you'll look at me and see what he saw. Something dirty. Something broken." Clay sat beside her, the grass cool against his hands. "You're not broken. You don't know what it's like," she said. "To carry something around inside you that you never asked for. Guilt, shame, fear. Even when things are good, even when I laugh, it's still there." He wanted to say the right thing, to fix it, but there weren't words strong enough. So he took her hand. "I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to stay." She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. Later that week, a letter arrived. Clay opened it with dusty fingers after a long day hauling freight. The envelope bore the mark of the Denver Circuit Court. His stomach dropped. He read it twice before sitting down. "What is it?" May asked, already bracing herself. "They're reopening the case," Clay said. "The man you stabbed, he filed charges. He's saying you fled an attack, not self-defense." May's face drained of color. "They found me. He sent men before. This time, he's using the law." Ruthie started crying from the next room, but neither of them moved. May stared at the wall. "I told you this would happen. You didn't do anything wrong. They won't care. He's got money, friends in the city. I've got a husband who hauls freight and a baby girl with no birth papers." Clay tried to stay calm. "We'll get a lawyer. Henry knows people. We'll fight it." May shook her head. "I can't do this again. I can't sit in some courtroom while they twist my words and call me a liar. I can't be locked away from Ruthie. You won't be." Her voice cracked. "You can't promise that." That night, she didn't sleep. Clay heard her moving around the house after midnight, checking windows, folding and refolding clothes, packing and unpacking the baby's things. She was getting ready to run again. He knew that look, the survival instinct. It didn't care about logic. It only knew danger. At dawn, he found her by the stove with Ruthie in her arms, already dressed and wearing her traveling boots. "I'm going," she said. "Before they come." Clay stepped between her and the door. "Where will you go?" "North. Into the hills. There's women up there. I heard talk in town. Women who help girls like me. Maybe I can stay hidden long enough to give Ruthie a chance. She needs more than hiding, May. She needs her mother. Alive. Not locked in some cell." "And what about me?" Clay asked, more hurt in his voice than he expected. "Do I not count?" May blinked fast. "You count too much. That's why I have to go. Because if they take me, you'll lose everything. I won't do that to you." He stepped forward. "Don't leave. I have to. Let me go with you." She looked at him like he'd just spoken in another language. "You'd give up your whole life for this." Clay reached out and touched Ruthie's soft cheek. "You are my life." May's face crumpled, and she sank into his arms, holding Ruthie between them. She cried, hard and deep, like something inside her was breaking apart just to be put back together again. They didn't leave that day, or the next. Instead, Clay rode into town and spoke with Henry. They found a lawyer, a woman named Miss Charlotte Wells, who used to work cases for the miners. She agreed to take May's case. "You'll need a statement," she told them. "A full one, with no holes. You lie to the court, they'll bury you." May nodded, hands trembling in her lap. "I'll tell the truth. All of it." So she did. She told Charlotte about the night Mr. Bannister trapped her in the back room, about the knife in her apron, about the look in his eyes when he realized she wasn't going to be silent anymore. Charlotte listened without interrupting, scribbling notes in shorthand. When May finished, Clay was holding her hand so tight his knuckles ached. "Truth is hard to defend when the law's against you," Charlotte said. "But it's all we've got. I'll do what I can." In the weeks that followed, the pressure built. They filed a petition for testimony, and Clay gave a sworn statement. Henry vouched for Clay's character. The case would be heard in Denver. They'd have to go back where it started, May said one night, staring into the fire, where I lost everything. You didn't lose everything, Clay said. Not yet. She looked at him, eyes filled with fear, but also something else, something steadier. Do you still want me, Clay? After all this? I never stopped. It wasn't a kiss that followed. Not a touch. Just a quiet moment where the truth between them hung heavier than words. They were afraid. Deep down, both of them carried fear like old wounds. May feared being erased, turned into someone she wasn't. Clay feared losing her, after finally letting himself believe in something again. But they were standing in the fire together now. And somehow, even when the worst was waiting, they were still holding on. The courthouse in Denver hadn't changed. It still sat tall and gray like a tombstone in the center of the city, casting long shadows across the brick streets. May stood on its steps, shoulders squared, Ruthie asleep in her arms, and stared up at it like it was the gate to something final. Clay stood beside her, his hand resting gently at the small of her back. He didn't say anything. He didn't try to talk her out of coming. He just saddled the wagon, packed the food, and drove them across the plains like it was the only thing that made sense. For once, words didn't fix it. Presence did. Inside, it smelled of old paper and polish. People murmured in the hallway, some dressed in sharp city suits, others wearing bonnets and calloused hands, looking out of place the way May felt. Her stomach turned when she saw the man waiting just beyond the doors. Not Bannister himself. He wouldn't dare come so close. But his lawyer, Mr. Frederick Rowan. Slick hair, polished shoes, a smirk that seemed nailed to his jaw. He gave May a brief look, then turned away like she was a stain on the floor. The courtroom wasn't large, but it felt endless. Clay took Ruthie and sat in the back while Charlotte guided May to the front. She wore her plainest dress and kept her hands folded tight to stop the trembling. The judge, an older man with narrowed eyes and a voice like gravel, called the hearing to order. Rowan stood first. She left Denver after attacking my client in his place of business, he said smoothly. No charges filed until now, due to his injuries and her flight. But justice, Your Honor, delayed though it may be, must still be served. He looked over at May with the coldness of someone who'd never feared a thing in his life. Charlotte stood next. My client is not a criminal. She is a survivor. The man she injured, Mr. Bannister, had cornered her in a locked room, intent on forcing himself upon her. She acted to protect herself and her unborn child. A murmur rippled through the room. The judge banged his gavel once. Charlotte turned to May. Tell them what happened. Just the truth. So May stood, her throat dry, her eyes fixed somewhere beyond the windows. I worked at Bannister's dry goods store, she began. I was 16 when I started. I stocked shelves, cleaned, ran errands. He was kind at first. Then he wasn't. She told it all. How he started standing too close. How he touched her elbow when he didn't need to. How he asked questions that made her skin crawl. How she tried to laugh it off at first, not wanting to lose her job. How one night, he waited until the store closed and told her to sweep the back storeroom. How many times had he done that before? Charlotte asked. 3. And why didn't you report it? I didn't think anyone would believe me. He owned a shop. He was respected. I was just a girl with no family left in town. She paused, eyes meeting the judge's now. But that night, he said I owed him. Said if I wanted to keep my job, I had to make him happy. What did you do? I said no. He grabbed me. I had a paring knife in my apron pocket. I stabbed him in the side. Then I ran. Silence fell like snow. The judge leaned forward. And the child you bore, was that Mr. Bannister's? May's voice caught. Yes. Clay closed his eyes in the back row. Ruthie stirred but didn't wake. Charlotte nodded slowly. Do you regret what you did? I regret not leaving sooner. I regret being too scared to speak. But I don't regret fighting back. Rowan stood again, trying to discredit her. He brought up her travel under false names. Her marriage to Clay, so soon after arriving in Mason's Crossing. He called it a scheme, said she trapped a man to avoid justice. She married to protect herself, Rowan said, sneering. A criminal's last resort. Clay rose from the back. I married her because I loved her, he said, voice clear, and because she needed someone who wouldn't turn his back. That's not a crime. The judge banged his gavel. You'll sit unless called, sir. Clay sat, fists clenched. May turned her head just enough to see him, her face flushing with something more than fear. Shame, maybe, that he had to defend her so publicly. The judge recessed until morning. The court cleared slowly, whispers following May like smoke. She walked out into the gray light and sat on the steps, Ruthie in her lap, face pale and eyes glassy. I told them everything, she said softly. Charlotte nodded. You did. They didn't believe me. They will. But May wasn't sure. That night, back at the boarding house, she sat in the corner while Clay fed Ruthie and told her stories in a low voice. May watched them like someone looking through glass, separate, not part of it. When Clay finished, he turned to her. I saw you up there. You were brave. I was desperate, she said. Sometimes they're the same thing. She looked down. I never wanted to be a victim. I didn't want you to see me like that. I don't. But you know now. Everything. Even the worst of it. Clay stepped forward, knelt down, and took her hand. It doesn't change what I see when I look at you. May finally looked up, tears brimming. And what's that? A woman who fought like hell to protect herself and her child. Who's still fighting. I've never loved anyone more. Her chin trembled, and she pressed her forehead to his. I'm so tired of being afraid. Then stop running. I don't know how. Start here. With me. The next morning, the final hearing was brief. Charlotte made her closing statement. My client is not asking for pity. She is asking for the right to live without being hunted by a man who thought he could take her body without consequence. You can call it assault. You can call it self-defense. But what it truly was is survival. And for that, she should not be punished. Rowan tried to push again, twisting words, poking holes, but his voice had lost its sheen. The courtroom wasn't buying it anymore. Even the judge looked wearier this time, more thoughtful. He didn't rule that day. Said he'd take time to review the case. That meant waiting again. They stayed in Denver for 3 more days. 3 long, quiet days filled with long walks, shared meals, and the slow rebuilding of breath. On the 4th day, the ruling came. Case dismissed. No charges. No warrant. May's record wiped clean. She held the paper in her hands, staring at it like it might disappear. Then she folded it, tucked it into Ruthie's blanket, and turned to Clay. Can we go home now? They left that night. The road back was quieter than the ride in. May didn't talk much, but she rested her head against Clay's shoulder when he reached for her hand, and that was more than enough. They arrived in Mason's Crossing under a sky of soft gold and purple, the land wide and green with early summer. May stepped down from the wagon and looked around like she was seeing it for the first time. Not as a place she was hiding, but as a place she might belong. Clay lifted Ruthie out of the back, and the baby squealed in delight at the breeze. May reached for her, kissed her cheek, then turned to Clay. I want to be your wife for real, she said quietly. Not because I needed protection, but because I love you. Clay's eyes brimmed before he smiled and pulled her close. Then let's start over. They didn't have a church wedding or a new dress, but they said new vows on the front porch that Sunday. Just the 2 of them, with Ruthie in May's arms and the prairie stretching out behind them. And though the past still lingered in the corners, it no longer ruled her. She had faced it, spoken it aloud, and in doing so, had turned something ugly into something whole. For the first time in her life, May wasn't running. She was home. The air was warm that evening, the kind of still summer heat that wrapped around the skin and sank into the bones. The prairie stretched quiet and golden beyond the porch, crickets humming in the grass, cicadas buzzing in the cottonwoods. Inside the house, Ruthie slept curled in her crib, a ribbon clutched in one tiny fist. May stood at the window and watched the shadows settle, her hand resting softly on the sill. It no longer felt like a borrowed life. It felt real, solid, like it had always belonged to her. She turned as Clay came in from the barn, brushing hay from his sleeves, hair damp with sweat. He paused in the doorway when he saw her, his expression softening, like just seeing her stilled the day's ache. He didn't speak right away, and neither did she. They didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable now, like an old song. "I fixed the back gate," he said finally, setting his hat down. She smiled. "I didn't even know it was broken." He shrugged. "Wasn't bad, just needed tightening." Figure it was time. May crossed the room slowly and stood in front of him, her eyes steady on his. "Feels like a lot of things are getting fixed." Clay nodded, eyes warm and a little tired. "Yeah." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Her breath caught, not from nerves, not from fear, but from something quieter. "Need, maybe, trust." "Do you still think about it?" she asked. He didn't have to ask what she meant. "Some nights. Not like before. It's not chasing me anymore. Just a shadow. It passes." She touched his chest lightly, right over his heartbeat. "I still wake up sometimes, thinking I'm back there. In that storeroom. Or on the floor of your barn, bleeding." "You're not," he said. "You're here. With me." May leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. He held her gently, one hand sliding up her back. For a long moment, that didn't move. The house was still, the world outside hushed. When she looked up, her face was open, unguarded. "I want a night to be ours," she said quietly. All the way, Clay hesitated only long enough to search her face, to make sure she was asking from her heart and not from something broken. Then he nodded. They didn't rush. He lit the oil lamp in the bedroom, casting a warm glow that flickered across the walls. May moved slowly, undressing with a reverence she hadn't known she could feel in her own skin. Not shame, not fear, just softness, presence. Clay undressed too, quiet and careful, as if every movement was a promise. When he came to her, his hands weren't rough or hurried. They were steady, familiar. He kissed her shoulder first, then her jaw, then her mouth with the kind of patience that said there was no place else he'd rather be. They made love like two people who had been broken in different ways, but had somehow made it out the other side. There were no loud gasps or wild passion, just slow, deep connection. Every touch was a question, every breath an answer. And when it was over, they didn't speak. They just lay there, skin to skin, with the windows open and the night rolling in like a tide. Later, May traced circles on Clay's chest with the tip of her finger. "Do you think people like us, people who come from dark places, can build something good?" Clay looked at her, eyes calm. "I think we already have." She nodded slowly. "I'm still learning how to be someone who isn't scared all the time. You don't have to be anyone but who you are. That's what scares me most." Clay smiled, pulled her closer. "Then I'll be here. When it's good. When it's hard. We'll figure it out." Outside, the wind picked up just enough to rustle the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its cry high and sharp before fading back into the dark. May closed her eyes and listened. For the first time in a long time, the sound didn't unsettle her. When morning came, Ruthie babbled from her crib, arms reaching for the sun. May scooped her up and held her close, kissing her soft curls. She glanced at Clay, who stood shirtless by the stove, frying eggs with one hand and pouring coffee with the other. It was so simple, so everyday, and yet it filled her chest with something too wide for words. Later, they walked down to the pasture together. Clay carried Ruthie on his shoulders, her laughter spilling over the grass. May held his hand, bare feet brushing clover and dirt. They stopped by the fence line, watching the horses graze. The wind blew her hair back, and she turned to him with a quiet smile. "This is what I dreamed of when I ran." He looked out over the field, then down at her. "You didn't just run, eh? You survived. You fought, and now you get to live." She nodded, squeezing his hand. No big triumph. No parade. Just breath. Just love. Just the slow, steady steps of a woman building a new life, one sunrise at a time. And this time, no one would take it from her.